They told me I didn't belong in my own son's house. His wife laughed in my face, until the butler handed me the keys. My name is Sylvia Grant. I'm 72 years old, and this is the story of how I walked into my son's mansion uninvited, only to discover the truth they never wanted me to know. Before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? The iron gates groaned open with a mechanical hum, tall and imposing, as if they guarded not just a mansion, but an entirely different world. I stepped out of the taxi, clutching the strap of my modest handbag. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes, and for a moment I felt the absurdity of my presence here, uninvited, unexpected, and most certainly unwelcome. But I didn't flinch. I had walked into harder places in my life. The mansion rose in front of me like something from a glossy magazine, spread a sprawling estate with white stone walls and windows that gleamed even under the clouded sky. I could almost hear the laughter of my son's friends, the clinking of glasses, and the echo of a life that had, somewhere along the way, grown far beyond me. The heavy front doors opened before I even reached them, and there she was, my daughter-in-law, perfectly styled, wrapped in silk that probably cost more than half a year of my pension. Her lips twisted into that sharp little smile she reserved for moments that she thought herself superior. "Well, well," she said, her tone dripping with mock surprise. "What an unexpected visit." Her eyes swept over me like I was dirt tracked in from the street. "No call, no invitation. Bold of you to think you could just show up here." I stood straight, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "This is my son's house, isn't it?" That made her laugh, really laugh, a high-pitched, cruel sound that bounced off the marble walls of the foyer. "Your son's house? Oh no. This place isn't yours, not even close. Don't act like you belong here. This," she gestured grandly to the chandelier, the velvet drapes, the polished floor that sparkled like glass, "is our world now, not yours." For a moment, she lingered in the doorway, as if debating whether to let me in at all. Then, with a mock graciousness, she stepped aside. "Fine," she said. "If you're so determined to embarrass yourself, come in." The air inside was cooler, scented faintly with orchids and lemon polish. Every surface gleamed, every corner screamed of money. I followed her through the hall, each step echoing, each glance from the staff carefully avoided. They all knew me, I realized. They recognized who I was, but not one of them dared speak. "You'll forgive me," she said sweetly, leading me past a wall lined with gilded mirrors. "If I don't roll out the red carpet. We weren't expecting visitors of your kind." Her words stung more than I cared to admit, but I swallowed the anger, let it sit heavy in my chest, and said nothing. As we entered the living room, I saw him, my son, my boy, though there was nothing boyish about him anymore. He was standing near the grand fireplace, wearing a tailored suit, as if he'd just stepped off a business magazine cover. When he saw me, his expression didn't soften. No smile, no warmth, only a flicker of annoyance before his jaw tightened. "Mother," he said curtly, "you're here." I waited, hoping for something more. Anything. But he just stood there, hands in his pockets, as if my presence was nothing more than an inconvenience. His wife sank into the sofa with practiced grace, crossing her legs. "She thought she'd just walk right in," she said to him, a smirk tugging at her lips. "No notice, no invitation. As if she has any right." I looked at him, not her. "I came to see you." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up a glass of wine from the side table, swirling it casually, as though debating how much patience I deserved. Finally, he said, "This isn't the way, Mother. You can't just show up here whenever you please. This isn't—" He paused deliberately, then finished. This isn't your place." The words hit harder than I expected. Not your place. His wife laughed again, tilting her head like a queen humoring a fool. Exactly. This house isn't yours. It never was. You should remember that before you get too comfortable. The staff hovered in the background, a maid near the doorway, a butler at the far corner. I noticed how their eyes flicked between us, uneasy, as if they were watching a storm they'd long anticipated but never dared to acknowledge. I stayed quiet, letting the weight of their mockery sink into the room. My silence unsettled them more than any outburst could have. Finally, I said, "I see." Just that. And I sat down in the nearest chair, upright, composed. If they wanted a scene, they wouldn't get it. Not yet. The butler's gaze lingered on me a moment longer, unreadable. He adjusted his gloves, straightened his stance, and for the first time since I'd walked in, I felt a shift. A small one, but enough to know something was coming. And it wasn't what they expected. The butler disappeared silently as my daughter-in-law leaned forward, that same sly smile carved into her face. "Since you've made the trip, I suppose we can offer you lunch, though—" She let her eyes flick over my outfit, a plain blouse and cardigan I'd worn countless times. "I do hope you don't mind something refined." Her words carried a barb, but I didn't flinch. "Lunch will be fine," I said simply. "Splendid." She rose gracefully and gestured toward the adjoining dining room, the heels of her designer shoes tapping against the marble floor with irritating precision. "This way." I followed her through a set of arched doors, my son walking behind us. The dining room was as ostentatious as the rest of the house, a long, polished mahogany table that could have seated 20, chandeliers dripping crystal, and windows that overlooked a manicured garden where roses bloomed unnaturally perfect. Seated at the table already were 3 of their friends, young, sharp, and dressed in outfits that screamed wealth. Laughter spilled from them until they saw me, and then it softened into curious smirks. "Oh," one woman said lightly, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she lifted her wineglass. "I didn't realize we'd have extra company." "She just turned up," my daughter-in-law replied sweetly, sliding into her chair at the head of the table, completely unannounced. Their smiles stretched wider, amusement flickering between them. I sat at the far end of the table, the place where one might seat an afterthought. The butler reappeared to pour wine, but I lifted a hand. "Just water, thank you." The guests exchanged looks. One man chuckled, muttering something about simple tastes. My son took his seat beside his wife, not at the head of the table, but close enough to remind me of his loyalties. He didn't even glance at me as he adjusted his cufflinks, his face impassive. The first course arrived a delicate arrangement of greens, drizzled with some dressing I couldn't identify. The wife leaned back, her voice pitched to carry. "This is a recipe I brought back from Florence. Of course, you wouldn't have had the chance to travel like that." She tilted her head at me, all mock innocence. The table erupted in laughter. I lifted my fork calmly and took a bite. "No," I said, my tone even. "I've never been to Florence." "Such a shame," one of the women sighed dramatically. "The art, the culture, it changes a person, doesn't it, Claire?" "Oh, absolutely," my daughter-in-law agreed, turning to them as though I wasn't there at all. "But then again, not everyone is cut out for that world." Her eyes lingered on me with deliberate cruelty. The humiliation was precise, sharpened by wealth and arrogance. They wanted me small, diminished in the shadow of their success. My son finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "You should have called, Mother. This isn't the way to come into someone's home." Someone's home. The words were chosen carefully, but I caught the weight of them. Not our home, not my home. Someone's. His wife's. His anyone's but mine. I set down my fork and looked directly at him. I thought I'd see my son. He didn't flinch, but he didn't soften either. You have. Now maybe it's best if you head back soon. You don't fit into this kind of setting. The silence that followed was worse than the laughter. The guests smirked into their glasses. The wife grinned with satisfaction, and I could feel the sting of their collective dismissal like a knife pressed against skin. But I stayed seated. My composure unnerved them. I could see it in the way the wife shifted slightly, her smirk faltering just a fraction. The butler re-entered with the second-course lamb with a garnish arranged like a painting. He placed it carefully in front of me, his eyes flicking up for the briefest moment to meet mine. And there, in that moment, was something the others didn't notice. Respect. The wife waved a dismissive hand. She doesn't need the lamb. Bring her something simpler. Bread, perhaps? The butler froze. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before he bowed and moved away. The insult hung in the air like smoke. The table erupted in muffled laughter again, and my son's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't stop her. He didn't defend me. I reached for the lamb dish anyway, pulled it closer, and took a slow bite. When I looked up, I met my daughter-in-law's eyes and smiled faintly, not kindly, but knowingly. The room quieted just a little, unsettled by my refusal to break. Somewhere deep inside, I knew, their arrogance was about to crumble. Not today, not this second, but soon. And when it did, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. The butler's gaze lingered again as he returned with the bread she'd ordered for me, placing it carefully on the table but not removing the lamb. His subtle defiance didn't go unnoticed. I leaned back in my chair, calm, silent, waiting. Because storms don't announce themselves, they just arrive. The laughter around the table swelled and then settled into a smug kind of quiet, the kind that only appears when cruelty has landed its mark. My daughter-in-law leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine as though she were the queen of the house, her crown invisible, but heavy with arrogance. "So," she said casually, turning her attention back to me, "tell us, how do you spend your days now? I imagine it must be quiet." The word dripped with condescension. She didn't want an answer. She wanted the guests to giggle again. But I didn't give her the satisfaction. "I manage just fine," I said calmly, cutting into the lamb with steady hands. That small resistance, my refusal to shrink, drew a sharp look from my son. He set his glass down and leaned forward, his voice low but cutting. "Mother, let's not pretend. You don't belong here. This isn't the life you know. It's not the life you built." The guests fell silent, all eyes darting between us. Even his wife's smug expression faltered for a second before hardening again. I met his gaze. "You think I don't belong in my own son's house?" His jaw tightened. "Yes, that's exactly what I think." The words were deliberate, a knife twisted slowly. The wife smiled approvingly, sliding her manicured hand over his arm. "Darling, you're right. We built this life. Every inch of this house, every luxury we have, we earned it." She looked at me, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "No one else has a claim here." I noticed the slip in her tone. We built this, her, him, together. Yet only moments ago she'd boasted of Florence, of family money, of inherited contacts. Their story didn't quite match the pride in her words. Still, I stayed quiet, watching them. My silence unnerved her more than if I had shouted. One of the guests cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, I think family always has a place, don't they? No matter what." But my son shut that down immediately. "Not when family doesn't know their boundaries." His eyes bored into me. "You can't just walk in here uninvited like you own the place, because you don't. This house isn't yours. This life isn't yours. Stop imagining you're part of it." The finality in his tone hit me like ice water. His wife laughed softly, triumphantly. "There it is," said plainly. You'll never have a claim here. Not on this house, not on him, not on anything. For the first time since I'd stepped into that mansion, I felt the sharp sting of betrayal sink past my armor. It wasn't her words, her cruelty had always been predictable. It was his, my son. The boy I had raised, now looking at me as though I were a stranger clawing at his life. I took a slow breath, willing my hands to stay steady on the table. If they thought they had broken me, they were mistaken. Not mine, I repeated softly. Not yours, he confirmed, leaning back in his chair as if sealing the judgment. The wife's smirk widened. She reached for her glass, lifted it high, and with a cruel flourish said, "To our home. May it always be free of unnecessary attachments." Her friends clinked glasses with her, though unease rippled beneath their laughter. The cruelty was sharper now, uglier. It wasn't just mockery anymore. It was exile. And yet, as I looked around, I noticed something. The butler, standing discreetly near the door, hadn't moved. His eyes weren't on the glasses, or the laughter, or even on the son and his smug wife. His gaze was fixed on me, and nothing else. That was the moment I knew this wasn't over, not even close. I placed my napkin neatly on the table, lifted my chin, and spoke just loud enough for the entire table to hear. "It's an interesting thing," I said, "to claim something as yours when it never truly belonged to you." The words landed like stones dropped in still water. No one laughed this time. My son stiffened. His wife's smile faltered, and the guests exchanged uneasy glances. The butler's gloved hands shifted against his side, and in that tiny motion I sensed what was coming. Something they could not see, but something they would never forget. The silence after my words stretched too long. The clink of silverware stopped, the laughter died, and for the first time since I arrived, the room felt heavy. My son sat rigid, his jaw tight, while his wife's eyes narrowed to cold slits. Then she laughed brittle and forced. "Don't try to sound wise," she sneered. "You've lived your small life in your small world. You'll never understand this one." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because at that very moment, the butler stepped forward. His presence was commanding, though he moved with quiet dignity. He had served in this house for years, longer than my son and his wife had even been together. His loyalty had always seemed to belong to them. But now, the look in his eyes told a different story. "Madam," he said, his voice calm and respectful, addressing me directly in front of everyone, "I believe this belongs to you." From his pocket, he drew a ring of keys, heavy, shining, unmistakable, and held them out to me. The air snapped like a whip. "What are you doing?" my daughter-in-law demanded, her voice sharp, her hand slamming against the table. "Those are for this house, for us." The butler didn't look at her. His gaze stayed on me. "No, ma'am, they are not." My son pushed his chair back abruptly, the legs screeching against the polished floor. "Explain yourself," he barked, his voice louder than I had ever heard it. The butler straightened his shoulders. "With all due respect, sir, the deed to this property is not in your name. It was never transferred. The rightful owner by law is your mother." The words detonated like a bomb. For a long, breathless second, no one moved. Then the wife's laugh burst out, high-pitched, almost hysterical. "That's ridiculous. Some kind of clerical error, obviously. Do you think we're fools? This is our home." But the butler's expression didn't falter. "I've kept the documents safe, madam. They remain unchanged. Every signature is hers. Every page of the deed bears her name. Legally, this house does not belong to you or your husband." The guests shifted in their seats, wide-eyed, the smug amusement drained from their faces. One woman actually set down her wineglass with a trembling hand. My son's face turned red, his composure unraveling. "You're lying. You're trying to humiliate me." I finally spoke. my voice steady, almost quiet compared to his rage. He's not lying. The wife's mouth fell open. You knew? I met her glare with calm certainty. Yes. The weight of that admission hung in the air. My son's rage faltered into disbelief. You knew? And you came here today? What? To gloat? I leaned forward slightly, folding my hands on the table. I came here today to see how far you would go. How far you'd mock me, dismiss me, push me out in a house that was never yours to begin with. The wife's face twisted with fury. This is insane. You're just trying to… But the butler interrupted, his voice firmer now. Madam, with all due respect, it is not insane. It is fact. This house belongs to her. It always has. The guests whispered among themselves, shock spreading like wildfire. I could see the cracks forming in the perfect image my son and his wife had worked so hard to project. Their wealth, their power, their status, all of it had been balanced on something fragile. And now, with a few simple words, the facade was collapsing. My son slammed his fist against the table, rattling the silverware. This is my house. I built this life. You can't just take it away. The butler's voice was almost pitying. Sir, you cannot lose what was never yours. That line silenced even him. I reached out, my fingers closing around the cold metal of the keys. They were heavier than I remembered, but they fit in my hand as though they had been waiting for me all along. I stood slowly. The eyes of everyone at the table locked on me. My son's face was pale now, his wife's lips trembling with suppressed rage. And I said, with a calmness that cut sharper than any scream, You told me I don't belong here, but this, I lifted the keys, letting them glint in the chandelier's light, says otherwise. The room froze. No laughter, no smirks. Nothing but the sound of truth settling like a stone in water. The chandelier light flickered across the polished table as I held the keys in my hand. Their cold weight steadied me, even as the silence in the room pressed down like thunder waiting to break. Then it broke. You're lying! My son shouted, his voice raw, echoing off the marble walls. He shoved his chair back violently, his fists clenched at his sides. This is my house. Mine. I worked for this. I earned it. You earned nothing, the butler interrupted evenly, though his tone carried no disrespect. Everything within these walls has always belonged to your mother. The deed remains unchanged. It was signed in her name before you ever moved in. Sir, your wealth may have built your company, your reputation. But this house, he shook his head. This house was never yours to claim. The wife leapt to her feet, her silk dress swishing angrily as she jabbed a finger toward him. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just a servant. What do you know about deeds and ownership? The butler straightened, taller somehow, his dignity and armor they couldn't pierce. Everything, because it was I who filed the papers. I who placed the documents in the safe. And I who swore never to forget whose name was signed across them. His gaze flicked to me briefly, a subtle acknowledgement. Her name, always hers. The guests stared wide-eyed, as though the floor had shifted under their feet. The air reeked of disbelief, the kind that stripped arrogance down to bone. My son's face turned crimson, his voice cracking with fury. You're betraying me. You're siding with her. After all I've done for you. The butler's reply was simple, unflinching. I serve the rightful owner of this estate. That has always been my duty. His wife's voice rose in a shrill pitch. This is absurd. Everyone knows this is our home. We've hosted events here, dinners, charity galas. People look at us as though we built all this. Do you think anyone will believe her over us? I let her words hang there before I spoke. People don't need to believe me, I said softly, firmly. They'll believe the deed. Paper doesn't lie. One of the guests cleared her throat nervously, her jeweled bracelet clinking as she shifted. She's right. If her name is on the deed. She trailed off, her eyes darting toward the butler. The wife slammed her hand against the table. No, no, I won't accept this. This is our life, not hers, not any more. Her voice cracked at the edges, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not mockery, not arrogance, but the dawning realization that everything she had flaunted was paper thin. My son tried again, his voice lowering into a plea, though rage still coiled beneath it. Mother, listen to me. You don't understand what you're doing. This house, it represents everything I've built, everything I've achieved. Without it, his words faltered, the mask slipping as desperation showed. I cut him off, my voice calm but merciless. Without it, you still have your company, your money, your wife, but you wanted more. You wanted me erased from this place entirely. You mocked me in these halls, humiliated me at your table, told me I had no place here. I held up the keys, letting them glint. And yet, here I stand. His wife's face twisted, contorted with panic and fury. We'll fight this, she hissed. We'll take you to court. You'll lose, the butler said before I could. His voice was quiet, but it cut sharper than a blade. You'll lose because the law is on her side. I've already prepared the documents. If necessary, they can be filed tomorrow morning. Every proof, every signature, every record. You cannot fight what is already hers. The wife fell back into her chair, her breath shallow, her nails clawing at the tablecloth. My son stood frozen, his shoulders heaving, his pride cracking like glass under weight it couldn't bear. The guests sat in horrified silence. Not one of them dared raise a glass now. Not one dared laugh. Their perfect evening had turned into a spectacle, a public unraveling of everything my son and his wife had pretended to be. I lowered the keys slowly, slipping them into my handbag. The click of the clasp echoed louder than their protests. This house, I said evenly, was never yours. You played at power inside borrowed walls, and today, your play is over. The butler stepped aside, bowing slightly as if sealing the truth. My son stared at me, pale and trembling, but said nothing. His silence was louder than any scream. And for the first time since I had arrived, the mansion felt quiet. Truly quiet. Not with smug laughter or cruel whispers, but with the weight of truth pressing down on everyone in that room. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. The chandelier above flickered faintly, its light catching on the polished silver, the crystal glasses, and the frozen faces of people who didn't know where to look. I didn't wait for permission. Slowly, deliberately, I rose from my seat at the far end of the table. My shoes clicked against the marble floor as I walked, steady and unhurried, past the stunned faces of my son's guests. I circled the table until I reached the head, the place my daughter-in-law had claimed so naturally when she first invited me in. Without a word, I pulled the chair back and sat down. The room shifted. It wasn't the house that changed. It was the air, the weight of the moment. For the first time that afternoon, I belonged exactly where I was sitting, and everyone knew it. My daughter-in-law shot up, her face flaming red. "Get out of that chair," she hissed, her voice cracking under the strain. "That's my seat." I placed my hands gently on the polished wood, calm as stone. "No," I said. "It isn't." The butler stepped forward, his posture impeccable, his voice steady. "She is correct, madam. That seat, that house, every brick and stone belongs to her. It always has." "Lies," she spat, turning on him. "You're overstepping. You think you can take her side against us. You'll regret this." But before her tirade could spiral further, the butler moved toward the sideboard. From a leather case, he retrieved a stack of documents, bound neatly, sealed, unmistakable in their authenticity. He laid them gently on the table in front of me, bowing slightly. "Here, madam, the original deed, as filed, every signature intact." My daughter-in-law's hands shook as she reached across the table, snatching the top page. Her eyes darted furiously across the words, searching for any flaw, any loophole. But there was none. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This can't be right." My son leaned over her shoulder, his face ghost pale as he read. His lips moved, but no sound came. He saw it. He couldn't deny it. Finally, he slammed the paper back onto the table. "It doesn't matter. Even if it's in her name, it doesn't matter. Everyone knows this is our house. We live here. We've made it ours." I tilted my head, watching him unravel. "But it isn't yours. You've paraded in my halls, mocked me at my own table, laughed at me in the home you claimed as your own. And now the truth is laid bare." The guests shifted uneasily. One man cleared his throat as though about to speak, but thought better of it. No one dared defend them now. My daughter-in-law tried again, desperation seeping through her cracks. "Fine, maybe her name is on the papers. But she wouldn't dare throw us out. She wouldn't risk destroying her own son's life." I leaned forward, meeting her eyes with quiet steel. "Wouldn't I?" The words sliced through the air. She faltered, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, gasping for air. My son looked at me, then really looked at me. The arrogance, the distance, all of it stripped away to reveal something rawer. Fear. Fear that the image he had built, the life he had paraded, was about to crumble in front of everyone who mattered to him. "You wouldn't do this," he said finally, almost pleading. "Mother, you can't." I sat back, folding my hands calmly in my lap. "I don't have to lift a finger. The law already has." The butler nodded once in solemn agreement. "It is true, sir. You live here at her discretion. Nothing more." The words cracked something deep inside him. His fists clenched, his shoulders hunched as though the weight of the truth was dragging him down. His wife looked at him, wide-eyed, desperate for him to fight back. But he had nothing left to give. I looked around the table, at the wide eyes, the pale faces, the guests who had laughed with such cruelty only an hour before. "You all raised your glasses to their power," I said evenly. "But tonight, you'll remember that the foundation you toasted never belonged to them. It belonged to me." The wife's face contorted, fury blazing in her eyes. "You'll regret this," she whispered. I lifted the keys once more, letting them gleam in the chandelier's light. "No," I said, rising from the head of the table. "You will." And with that, the room fell silent again, the weight of their broken pride settling into every corner of the mansion. The guests shifted in their seats like restless schoolchildren, their gazes darting between me at the head of the table and my son and his wife, collapsing under the weight of truth. Whispered fragments of disbelief broke the silence. "Her name is on the deed?" one of the women murmured. "I can't believe it," another muttered, clutching her glass as if it might anchor her. The murmurs spread, a quiet wave that stripped the glamour from the room. Where there had once been laughter and smugness, now there was only unease, the kind that comes when a mask is ripped away. My daughter-in-law leaned forward, her hand flat on the table, her voice trembling between fury and desperation. "Stop whispering. This is our house. Do you hear me? Ours." Her shriek rang hollow, bouncing back at her from the high ceiling. The guests avoided her gaze, their eyes fixed instead on the stack of papers in front of me, the irrefutable proof that undermined every word she spoke. My son slumped back in his chair, his jaw slack, his hands gripping the armrests like a man about to drown. For once, his expensive suit, his carefully styled hair, his polished shoes, none of it mattered. Without the illusion of ownership, he looked small. I sat tall at the head of the table, my hands resting calmly on the deed. "You told me I didn't belong here," I said, my voice steady. that I had no claim to this place. You humiliated me in front of strangers, mocked me in my own house. I paused, letting the words cut deep. Now the truth speaks louder than either of you ever could. The wife's face twisted, her voice breaking. You think this will make people respect you? No. All they'll see is an old woman clinging to a house she couldn't possibly manage. You'll be a joke. Her cruelty had lost its sharp edge. Now it sounded desperate, like a child throwing stones from the bottom of a well. One of the guests, braver than the rest, finally spoke. Claire, maybe it's best you sit down. The look she turned on him could have burned glass. Don't you dare take her side. But it was too late. The tide had shifted. None of them were laughing anymore. None of them saw her as the gracious hostess, the queen of her castle. They saw what she was, a woman who had built her pride on sand. My son looked at me then, really looked, his eyes wide and bloodshot. For a moment I saw something break through his anger, something raw, something pleading. Mother, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Please, don't humiliate me like this. Not in front of them. Humiliate him? The irony cut sharper than any insult. He had invited guests into this house and watched them laugh at me. He had allowed his wife to mock me as if I were nothing. And now, when the truth shattered his facade, suddenly humiliation mattered. I leaned forward, my gaze steady. You humiliated yourself the moment you forgot who made this life possible. You treated me as if I were invisible, disposable. And now, in the house you thought was yours, you're the one exposed. The butler's voice carried through the tense air, formal and unyielding. Sir, madam, you should be grateful she is even speaking to you with civility. In her position, most would have ordered you out already. The wife rounded on him, her voice shrill. You're just a servant. You don't get to eat. Enough. My son's voice cracked like a whip, silencing her mid-sentence. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. When he spoke again, it was barely more than a whisper. What do you want from us? The words hung heavy, and every guest at that table leaned forward, waiting. I let the silence stretch before answering. I don't want anything. Not your money, not your respect, not even your apology. All I ever wanted was simple. Not to be treated like a burden, not to be erased. The wife scoffed, though her voice trembled. Fine. You've made your point. Take your little papers and go. But don't think you can walk in here and… Claire. My son's voice cut her off, weak but sharp. He looked at me with hollow eyes. What are you going to do? I slid the papers back into their folder, resting my hand on top. That depends entirely on you. The room pulsed with tension, every pair of eyes watching, every breath held. The empire they had built in whispers and lies was collapsing around them, and I hadn't even raised my voice. The tension snapped like glass under pressure. My son's eyes searched mine, pleading for mercy, but I had none to give. The humiliation, the mockery, the audacity of his wife to sneer in my face, all of it had led to this moment. I stood slowly, keys still in my hand, and let the silence drag. You asked what I'm going to do, I said. My voice was low, steady, sharper than any scream. Here's your answer. I walked the length of the table, each step echoing across the marble. When I reached the door, I turned back. You may stay in this house, for now, but understand something clearly. You stay because I allow it. Not because you own it, not because you deserve it, and certainly not because you've earned it. Every stone you stand on is mine, and if you dare forget that again… I lifted the keys slightly. You'll find yourselves outside these gates before sunrise. The guests whispered again, scandal thick in their voices. This was no longer a polite lunch, it was a reckoning. The wife shot to her feet, her face blazing. You wouldn't dare, she shrieked. I met her fury with ice. I already have. My son collapsed back into his chair, his strength gone, his head bowed, his voice cracked. "Mother, please, don't do this to us." The words cut, but not in the way he thought. He wanted sympathy, but where was his sympathy when I walked through those doors, alone and uninvited? Where was his voice when his wife mocked me at his table? His silence had already chosen his side. The butler stepped closer, his expression composed, his tone absolute. "Sir, madam, you live here now at her discretion. If you value anything, I suggest you begin to show her the respect she deserves." The wife glared at him, trembling with rage. "We'll challenge this in court. We'll destroy her. Do you hear me? Destroy her?" I laughed, then a soft, humorless sound that made her blanch. "Destroy me? With what? Lies? Money? You've forgotten one thing, my dear. You're standing in my house, arguing over what was never yours. If anyone here is destroyed, it isn't me." The guests avoided her gaze. Some stood quietly, murmuring excuses as they slipped away, unwilling to witness more of the collapse. Their empire of pride was crumbling in real time. I stepped forward one last time, lowering my voice so the weight of every word struck home. "This isn't just about walls and deeds. This is about respect, about family, about the way you spit on the very foundation you stand on. Remember this. You have nothing without me. Nothing." The wife sank back into her chair, defeated but still seething. My son looked at me with eyes I barely recognized, hollow, broken, stripped of arrogance. I turned and walked toward the door. The butler moved swiftly to open it for me, his head bowed with quiet reverence. As I stepped out, I didn't look back, because I knew the walls behind me were no longer their fortress. They were their prison. The next morning, I returned. Not quietly, not timidly, but with purpose. The gates opened for me without hesitation, the staff greeting me with deference they had long suppressed. The butler walked at my side, his presence like a shield. Inside, the house was chaos. My daughter-in-law stormed through the halls, her hair undone, her voice shrill as she barked orders that no one followed. My son trailed behind her, drained, broken, begging her to calm down. They froze when they saw me. "You?" she spat. "You can't just waltz in here like you own the place." "I don't waltz," I cut her off, setting my bag down on the table with deliberate care. "And I don't just do anything. I own the place because it's mine. Today you'll finally understand that." The butler handed me a folder. Fresh documents, stamped, sealed. I laid them flat on the table, my hand pressing them down like a judge delivering a sentence. "This house is no longer yours to enjoy," I said. "As of this morning, the transfer has been filed. The movers will arrive shortly. You'll leave with what you brought, nothing more." My son's face crumpled. "Mother, please, don't do this. Don't take our home." I stared at him, unblinking. "You took my dignity the moment you laughed at me here. You let her mock me, treat me like dirt in front of strangers. You told me I had no place in this house, and now you beg me not to take it. No, I won't take what's mine. I'll give it to someone who deserves it." The wife's voice cracked with horror. "What are you saying?" The butler answered for me. "She has donated the estate to a foundation for elderly women abandoned by their families. As of this morning, neither of you have any legal right to remain." The words hit like gunfire. My son staggered back into a chair, his wife's face drained of color. "You can't do this," she screamed. "You'll ruin us." I lifted the keys from my bag and placed them calmly on the documents. "I already have." Outside, the sound of trucks echoed up the drive. Movers in uniforms strode toward the house, their presence undeniable. My son buried his face in his hands. His wife collapsed into silence, trembling. For the first time, neither of them had words to hurl, no arrogance to cloak themselves in. I turned to leave, my steps unhurried, my posture tall. The butler followed me to the door. bowing slightly as I stepped out into the sunlight. On the driveway, I paused and looked back one final time. My son and his wife stood in the doorway, stripped of everything they thought was theirs, their empire of pride reduced to rubble. I didn't gloat. I didn't sneer. I simply watched, calm, resolute, unbroken. Then I walked down the steps and into the waiting car, leaving them behind. Because justice doesn't always come with shouting or vengeance. Sometimes it comes quietly with the turn of a key, and I had just turned it.